You're tuned into Backbench Drivers. I'm joined this week by a very important guest. We've got Jim Savage here, former president of One Nation in Queensland. Jim has had a very storied history in politics, mainly involved with One Nation, but in recent history has departed to run as an independent candidate after discovering many of the issues with One Nation that we are sort of suffering from today. And he was also sort of an insider for a lot of the process where we had the story of Pauline Hanson founding One Nation all the way through to her leaving the party, and Jim actually was involved in bringing her back into the party. So I'm very excited to hear what Jim has to say, the story he has to tell about One Nation and the insights that he can provide. Welcome to the podcast, Jim.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for coming on. Let's get started right away. How did you get involved in politics, and how did you get involved in One Nation more specifically?
Well, a long time ago, I was a farmer at Beaudesert, and I joined the National Party, as most young farmers do, and was a great supporter of the late Sir Joe Bjelke-Petersen. And then as time went by, I just became more and more disillusioned with the Nationals, with their not allowing the branches to pick their own candidates, parachuting people in from Brisbane. And anyway, at about that time, Pauline Hanson came on the scene, and I went to a little meet and greet at Forest Hill, which is a tiny little town hall out of Beaudesert. And I met Pauline there, and I was hugely impressed with her. It was very noisy. There was a band playing, and Pauline said, "Let's go outside." So she spent half an hour outside talking to me. And most politicians want to maximise the attention by speaking to a crowd, but she was happy to take me aside and speak to me in person, listen to what I had to say, and I believed in all her policies, and I immediately joined the party. And that was right back when the party first started, and had been a member ever since, up until probably 2000. Anyway, look, I did leave the party at one stage after Pauline got elected to the Senate, and then she did invite me back into the party, and I did come back and run for the seat of Lockyer in 2017. But then not long after that, I left the party because of various issues over financial matters within the party.
Financial indiscretions have been a common theme among those who leave the party. Obviously, Mark Latham noted that as a major issue that sort of held the party back from growing, greatly affected his ability to lead, and just basically put a really bad taste in his mouth. So you're not alone on that. And I want to dig a little bit more into the beginning stages of One Nation. What was the party like at the very beginning in the founding stages? Was it very similar to how it is today? Obviously, there was great success back then. We're seeing great success in the polling numbers today. Do you want to compare and contrast what it was like in those early days, and whether we're seeing a similar sort of scene developing around One Nation today?
Look, when I first joined the party, I was obviously just a regular member, and I didn't get onto the executive until I think it was about 2001. 2002, might have been a bit after that. But no, look, in the early days, the party was extremely vibrant, extremely democratic. I remember we had an annual general meeting at the casino down the Gold Coast. We had thousands of people there. Representatives from every branch in Queensland was there, standing up and putting forward policies that they'd been sent from the branch to put to the party. And it was discussed back and forth among the members. And then they took a vote. From the 1,000-odd people there, we all voted on it, and if it passed, it became policy. It was extremely democratic, and it was certainly robust and lots of different opinions, but it was absolutely democracy in action. Nobody was spared. Nobody was prevented from talking. You had to be sent by your branch, of course, and come with policies that your branch had decided they wanted to present. But no, look, it was very, very open, very democratic, and very, very inclusive, which is not what it is now, of course. So it was tremendous in the early days. I was very proud to be a part of it.
When do you think that we started to see a dampening of the democratic rights of members within the party? Because nowadays, as is sort of common knowledge among those interested in conservative politics in Australia, right-wing politics, One Nation is a $1 corporation where Pauline Hanson is the sole shareholder. And so ultimately, she has total dictatorial powers over the party. And that has disheartened a lot of people, discouraged them from joining the party. When do you think that it became less about what the membership thought and more about what head office thought, and more specifically, Pauline.
2016.
And what was the main change that happened around then?
Pauline won a seat in the Senate.
Okay, and so then she sort of centralised power and basically didn't have much say. I want to hear a bit about your story with Hansen. So obviously she was leader of One Nation at the very beginning, but what very few know is that Hansen actually left the party a couple of years in. Did you want to dig a little bit into the reasons behind that, what she did in the intermediate period before rejoining One Nation?
Well, my understanding of it is this, John. In 2001, and this was before I became an executive member, so I was just an ordinary member, but I was told this by the people who were there, that in 2001 there was a federal AGM held in Melbourne with the various presidents and participants from all the states. And at that AGM, now this was just prior to the 2001 election in Queensland. And as most people would know, in 1998, One Nation got 11 members elected in Queensland. But by the time we'd reached the 2001 election 3 years later, we had none. Every single one had a falling out with the party for whatever reason, but they all fell out. The party couldn't keep them, and they all left, either resigned and went independent or started their own parties, and most of them failed at the next election, and that was that. So a great opportunity lost through no cooperation with head office with any of them, apparently. But in 2001 in Melbourne, Pauline, I believe, asked for some money. I think it was around 100,000, maybe a little bit more, for her to run her campaign. And I'm told that the joint meeting sort of said, well, One Nation's policy is we don't fund individual candidates, you have to fund your own, which I believe is still the policy. But Pauline insisted, and then they asked her, I believe, for some sort of a business plan, how she wanted to spend the money and what she'd do with it. And she wouldn't do that, so she got up and resigned and walked out in a huff. And that's how Pauline left One Nation in 2001, over money. And so sometime after that, I became president of Queensland. And look, we struggled. We struggled for the next 15 years. We contested every election, every single election, state and federal. And we operated on a budget of almost nothing. Most of the money needed for the operation of the party was financed by our vice president, Peter Wise, and myself. And our offices were donated, and everybody was a volunteer. There was nobody on the executive that was paid. We were all volunteers, and we had some wonderful volunteers, people who'd been with Pauline right from the beginning and basically kept the dream alive through all those years. And as I say, because Pauline, when she left the party, demanded we take her name from the party, which we did. And the Electoral Commission refused to pay us our electoral funding because they said, you're a different party than what you used to be. I eventually, myself and Peter Wise, took a legal challenge against that, and we did win in court. But the judge said it was so long ago, let's just move on and you don't have to get the money. So we did it tough for a very long time. And look, we were under more scrutiny than any political party's ever been. We had to have every single one of our annual returns, every I dotted, every T crossed. We were really, really under scrutiny, and we did, thanks largely to our secretary, Rod Evans, everything was done according to the law. Every meeting we had a treasurer's report, a secretary's report, a president's report that went out to the members. We were very, very transparent and very open. And anyway, and then in 2000, coming up to the 2016 election, we felt there was a change in the electorate. We felt that there was, we'd had all the Kevin Rudd boat people, and things were a bit of a mess, had been, and it was the one I ran for the Senate in 2010 and put forward a public policy on how to stop the boats and what to do. And Malcolm, what's his name? The Prime Minister.
Fraser.
No. The one that beat Kevin Rudd. Morrison. Scott Morrison became.
Scott Morrison.
Yeah, terrible memory. Scott Morrison got in and carried out the exact policies that One Nation had put forward on turning back the boats. Exactly, was a textbook, letter for letter copy. So even though we didn't win any seats, our policies were actually being used. So we felt that we were doing a job for the country and we weren't wasting our time. But in 2016, we really thought that the mood had changed and we thought there was a chance for One Nation to get a senator elected. Now, I had run for the Senate and did poorly for One Nation. And we realised that One Nation on its own wasn't going to get enough votes to win a Senate seat. And we realised that Pauline on her own wasn't enough. Pauline had already started another party in New South Wales called, I believe, Pauline's United Australia. I think she got 1.5% of the vote. So Pauline on her own couldn't do anything. One Nation on its own couldn't do anything. We're the first to admit it. So before the 2016 election, Ian Nelson, who was the Treasurer, and myself, the President, went to her farm at Ipswich. And we said, look, Pauline, we think we can win a Senate seat with you and One Nation back together again. And the only thing we said is, look, if you get elected, you be the politician, let us run the executive, let us do the business management of the party, you do the politics, which you're best at. Anyway, Pauline said, I don't think anybody likes me anymore and I won't get elected. And Rod Evans, who was the Treasurer, he doesn't like me, he won't let me back into the party. So I rang Rod Evans and put him on the phone and said, Rod, Pauline wants to talk to you. So Rod spoke to Pauline and assured her that he did in fact want her back in the party, that he was only hanging around until the party could make some progress and then he wanted to retire. So we convinced Pauline to come back to the party and we would give her the number one slot on the Senate ticket. And the rest is history. She came back and she won the Senate seat. And not long, and she insisted on being on the executive, which we allowed. And even though it's unusual. And then not long after that, I was in New Guinea. I was working fly in, fly out overseas, and I was away for a month. And Pauline called an executive meeting, didn't tell the vice president, held an executive meeting. And in our constitution, the executive can appoint other members to the executive until we have the next AGM, at which time they must resign and face election from the members. So you can do a temporary appointment to the executive. So Pauline appointed, I think it was 3 people to the executive, people who we'd never heard of. I don't even know if they were members, but total strangers. So when I came back from overseas, suddenly Pauline had control of the executive. And obviously they were Pauline, people who will do what Pauline wanted. So anyway, so at that point I resigned because I no longer had any faith in the executive. Peter Wise, the vice president, he resigned. And so basically Pauline she made herself new constitution, president for life. And then when she does retire, she can appoint the next president. I think Robert Mugabe had a similar constitution, according to an old advisor of Joh Bjelke-Petersen's. Colin Dorber told me about that. So anyway, no, it wasn't Colin Dorber. It's the wrong man. Sorry, it was somebody else. Anyway.
Either way, similar sort of mismanagement between the two leadership styles. Yeah,
so I left the party and I kept my mouth shut because I still wish One Nation all the best, and I still do. And I would encourage everybody to vote for One Nation at the next election. But in 2017, Pauline invited me back into the party. And so I came back into the party and I was appointed as the candidate for the Lockyer Valley and I contested that seat. I think I got 35% of the vote. The LNP got 35.4%. So it was a very, very narrow. Anyway, I lost and that was it. But at the 2019 AGM, which was held at South Bank in Brisbane, I put in writing a notice that I would be asking from the floor for a treasurer's account and an auditor's report, which is standard fare at any AGM. But as Pauline hadn't been keen on doing that, I put it officially in writing that I was going to ask for it. So when I got to the AGM, I was escorted out the door by security and told I wasn't allowed to set foot in the building or attend the meeting.
That's insane.
And according to people who were at the meeting, there was only about 30 people there and they were all staffers or immediate friends. So basically, there were very few ordinary members there because it was quite an expensive unlike any party I've ever been in, that I've ever heard of, One Nation charged the members a fee to attend the AGM, and a lot of pensioners couldn't afford it. I think it was $50 a ticket. I paid for mine, mind you, and I was kicked out. I never got a refund. Well, thanks, Pauline, you owe me $50. But anyway, and I believe there was no executive, no Treasurer's report, no auditor's report, and none of the members of the executive resigned, as you do at an AGM, and then put yourself up for re-election. The secretary, I think, was Rod Miles. He just said, I want to stay in the job. Anybody disagree? And nobody put their hand up. So he said, okay, I'm elected. How about everybody else? No one commented. So he said, okay, well, they're elected too. So it was very, very unprofessional. And I did say at the time to the treasurer, who was a young 20-year-old boy, a pick of James Ashby's, I said, mate, you're going to end up in jail, because they're going to get you to do things that are illegal. And then when you get charged, they'll walk away from you. Well, as most people, I think it was last year or the year before, he was actually charged by the Electoral Commission for fraud. But I think because of his guilty plea in his youth, he was not jailed. So I wasn't wrong in that prediction. But look, all I can say is with One Nation, I think the policies that Pauline puts out, generally speaking, reflect the opinion of the Australian community. They reflect my opinions, and also reflect the opinions of the more honest members of the National Liberal Party. If you speak to them privately, they will say they agree, but they haven't got the balls to say it in public. So, look, I hope Pauline goes gangbusters in the next election, and I hope in all the states, in the coming state elections, One Nation does really well. The only caveat I would put on that is I would say to the members of One Nation, of which I am not one anymore, I would say to the members, support the party 100%, but do expect accountability from your executives. Don't just hand over the branch's money to them, because you'll never get it back, and expect treasurer's reports, auditors' reports, and fair and open elections at your AGMs. Every member of the executive must resign at an AGM and then put themselves up for re-election if they wish to stand again. That's the standard fare for running any, whether it's the Boy Scouts or the Girl Guides or the local Rotary Club. That's how it works, and that's how political parties work as well. And I would just encourage the members to demand fiduciary accountability from the party and democracy in the appointment of executives of the party, because at the moment every single person in the executive is paid by Pauline. And, when somebody pays you to do something, you know what? You do what the boss tells you, whether you believe it, whether it's right, whether it's not. In my day, every single one was a volunteer, and therefore, I can assure you, nobody ever had any qualms about coming forward and putting their ideas together. And we had some great heated arguments in our state executive, but when it was over, we all shook hands and were all mates, and we are all still mates to this day. Every single one of the executive, those that are still alive, we're still all good mates. It was a great party. And a lot of the supporters, the oldies that are in their late 70s and to the mid 80s now, a lot of them still meet regularly for coffee once a week, and still talk about politics. And they all say the same thing. They really, really want One Nation to do well, but they don't want people like James Ashby influencing Pauline and the party, and they just want to see some accountability. But they're very supportive of the party, but they're not supportive of the management. And I guess that's pretty much where I stand as well.
And I think that's the most reasonable position for someone with our politics. Obviously, we'd love to see a reduction in immigration. We believe it is essential to the survival of our country. But we simply have a lot of problems with the leadership of One Nation. The unfortunate thing is everyone identifies One Nation when they go to the ballot box as the anti-immigration party. And so it's sort of inevitable that they will succeed, it looks like, at the next election. That's corroborated by polling, obviously, which shows One Nation outflanking the Liberals in a lot of cases with their success. Yep. I just wanted to ask you, dive a little bit deeper into that. Obviously, you mentioned you invited One Nation, Pauline Hanson back into One Nation. You thought he was essential to One Nation's success. And I think that your instincts were clearly correct because she won that Senate spot. Do you think that had you not invited Hanson back, One Nation would still be experiencing the success that it's having today, potentially under better leadership? Let's say it might even have been yourself and, and the rest of the executive, like you said, that still meets up today but laments Hansen having taken over? Or do you think that no, One Nation would have petered out before ever surviving to today, and we would have no sort of prominent anti-immigration option on the ballot?
No, I think One Nation needed Pauline. Look, unless we have somebody in Parliament in Canberra spruiking our wares, spruiking our policies, the public won't hear it. And where we were before, nobody heard it. We could write letters to the editor. We could issue. We issued policy statements almost on a monthly basis. We are the only political party in the country that had its own newspaper, and I don't think there's any left now. It was called The Nation, and we ran that for years and years and years. And actually, it was the only thing in the party that made any money. But look, I think we had to get Pauline back. We made that decision. I mean, there's a lot of water under the bridges with personalities between Pauline and the various members of the executive. But, we're talking about politics, not personalities. And we believed that Pauline was what we required to get that Senate seat. And as it turned out, it was correct. And I think if we hadn't made that decision, we wouldn't. If I had run, wouldn't have. I already run once, and I bombed out. I'll admit it. Nobody gave a rat's ass about Jim Savage, but people do know Pauline Hanson, and it was a winning combination, and it still is. It's just that I think it's gone to her head. I know she will call me a disgruntled former member, but she should understand I'm more than just a former member. I was the president for a decade, and I put a lot of my own money into keeping the party alive, just so it could exist, buy a new computer, conduct meetings. So, I did it for selfless reasons, and I still do. And I still wish Pauline all the best, and I hope she does really, really well. And as far as the immigration issue, well, the One Nation immigration issue was largely drawn up by Peter Wise. Peter died last year. He was a great supporter of One Nation's and a great supporter of Pauline's. And financially, he put an awful lot of money into the party, an awful lot of money. And the immigration policy was driven very much by Peter Wise all through those 15-odd years when Pauline was away. And it was pretty much the policy that Pauline took up and ran with up until now. But I would give the credit for that to Peter Wise, not Pauline Hanson. But she's carried it on, and she was on about immigration a long time ago, long before the guys who asked her back into the party did that. So I'm not taking anything away from her. She's absolutely right. And I would just make one little comment. I think I have to, in support of Pauline in her talk about what's a good Muslim, which I know has got her into a lot of strife. We have this term Islamophobia, which a phobia means an unreasonable fear of something. So Islamophobia means an unreasonable fear of Islam. Well, Islam is basically the political arm of the Muslim religion. You can be a Muslim, but an Islamist is somebody who promotes the political side of being a Muslim. Now, Islam and the Quran, if you interpret the Quran literally, if Muhammad's dying words were, go out and kill the Jews wherever you find them. Jesus' dying words were, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. A slight difference in ideology between Christianity and Islam. The Quran is full of quotes, killing Jews, killing the infidel, slaying them, beheading them, killing gays. Now, therefore, if they were to do what they should do as a good Muslim and obey the Quran, then fearing them is not unjustified. It is not an unjustifiable fear. It is a very, very justifiable fear. If you're going to do what your Bible tells you to do, we should be fearing them. Fortunately, most of them don't. But doesn't that make them not a good Muslim? I mean, they say turn the other cheek in the Christian religion. Now, I know for a fact that I've often not done that myself, so maybe I'm not a good Christian. But if you're a Muslim and you don't go out and do all these horrible things, then probably you're not a good Muslim. But if you are a good Muslim, then do you or do you not do those things? I don't know. It's a question that somebody smarter than me would answer. But to say we should be afraid of Islam, it's not unjustified, and it's certainly not a phobia. So in Pauline's defence, she's absolutely right. What is a good Muslim? And I would ask the imams of all our mosques to tell us what a good Muslim is. They won't tell us.
I think, yeah, it's sort of incumbent in this phrase that we've heard about from a lot of people that try to reconcile Islam and modern Western secular countries. I say secular as it's sort of an unfortunate reality because I am a Christian, but it is the case. We've got multiple different religions coexisting in the same space, hostile to each other in many instances. And one in particular, as we saw at the Bondi shooting, does at its extremes or at its, it does have a minority that does lash out into violence from time to time. It's sort of a consistent thing throughout history. If anything, this is at its lowest ebb in terms of Islamic violence if you compare it to the caliphates, to the Ottoman rule, to these various points throughout history in which Islam was the violent elements, the militant elements were actually politically sponsored as well, as we see in sub-Middle Eastern countries today. It's actually at its most peaceful point, though, in history, it seems. But yeah, I think you're right. We have heard a lot of people in response to that, a lot of people that are trying to approach solutions from what I'd say is a classical liberal perspective. They'll say we need to promote moderate Islam. It's kind of incumbent in that phrase right there. If you need to promote moderate Islam, what is Islam? Islam is by definition then not moderate, right? It needs a modifier on it to become something that can cohabitate in, like I said, modern Western secular society and not cause us immense problems every day. So yeah, I think that anyone that's reasonable and has I'd say unbiased look at what Hansen is saying has to come to the same conclusion that a good person cannot be a good Muslim because they will be simply either disregarding or disobeying large portions of their history and of their holy book and some of their clerics as well. So no, I think that is a very defensible position.
Well, I think that,
yeah.
in regards to this apparent creature called a moderate Muslim, not once have I heard of any of the imams in any of the mosques in Australia denounce the killings of women and homosexuals in Iran, denounce the rape of little babies on October 7, 2023. Not one denouncement, but I did see thousands of them demonstrating 2 days, the day after October 7, at the Opera House, chanting and cheering and going on how it's a wonderful victory for the Islam it was. So if these are the people we've got in Australia, Pauline is absolutely right. We have a lot to be worried about. A lot of Western Europe is probably doomed. The Muslim population there is now so great, with an average birth rate, I think, of about 8.1 children per couple. I think in Australia it's an average of 9 per couple. The average Australian are breeding at the rate of about 1.2. We'll be outbred. Simple that. We will become a caliphate, an Islamic caliphate in 100 years unless we do something really serious right now. And all we've got to do is apply the law equally to everybody. But at the moment, laws don't apply to Muslims, but, they can sit down in the middle of a street, in the middle of a riot and pretend they're praying. Well, you know what? They can pray somebody else will get the handcuffs and locked up. I think our police are afraid of them. The New South Wales police are terrified of you have a pro-Palestinian demonstration marching down the street without a permit. What do the cops do? They arrest a sole guy holding an Israeli flag, saying he's inciting violence. Our cops are cowards, all of them. And I've got no time for them. Until they grow some balls and start enforcing the law and stop being afraid of these bastards, they'll take, the mob will take over. And that's why people are supporting Pauline. I don't blame them, and so do I.
I do put a lot of credit on what you're saying about the political reasons why Islam is given such free reign in this country. I do want to push back a little bit in that there is a tendency to exclusively blame Muslim immigration into this country for all of the country's problems, or to say they're only concerned about Islamic immigration, when I do believe it's a larger problem. Muslims remain a very small minority in this country, and even with high birth rates, they're really not the main problem that we need to be concerned with demographic replacement. I mean, Indian immigration and past Asian immigration, which isn't really our main source anymore, East Asian that is, they have created much larger multicultural communities in this country, which I think are the main problem when we're talking about the immigration issue right now. Because although we can very easily look at the various, let's say, criminal elements that are bred by some Muslim communities, and we can easily say that's horrible. We don't want that. We don't want violence and crime and the various drug gangs that have come out of that community. It's much harder to critique the economic takeover from, let's say, Indian communities. What would
Yep.
say is a cultural ghetto where they work together to the detriment of other Australians. They are buying up rural infrastructure, a lot of, because they, in order to get permanent residency, need to live in rural communities for a time. They're able to take over the small shops in rural areas, and slowly but surely, they are buying up more and more infrastructure, which I do think is a concern for ordinary Aussies, something that's even more pressing than Islam. But look, we won't go too far into it. We did want to stick on the topic of One Nation. I think that was an important digression, though, because obviously the story of One Nation is tightly bound up with the consequences of immigration.
Sure, it
just
is.
to
Yep.
just to go back to, I think, a topic that you touched on earlier, people will be very interested in hearing more of, is the question of One Nation's leadership. Um, Obviously, we talk about Ashby. He joined the party 2015 around then. Hansen came back to the party around then. The contention has often been that the problem with One Nation is that Pauline Hanson lets herself be controlled by other powerful, persuasive men in her orbit. Once upon a time, people said that about Pasquarelli, David Oldfield. Nowadays, people say that about James Ashby. I personally believe Oldfield and Pasquarelli had a positive influence over Pauline Hanson, shifting her in a more staunchly nationalist direction, oftentimes. Whereas with James Ashby, he is a far, I'd say, more nefarious character from an outside perspective. Did you want to dive a little bit into your perspective on that? Is everything to be blamed on Ashby? Are there problems with Ashby? Or is Pauline Hanson partly, or maybe principally, to blame as well?
Look, Pauline's ultimately responsible for everything she does, as we all are. But I think Ashby, look, I'll tell you a little story as an aside, and this is what was told to me by the person involved, but I didn't see it. When Pauline was at a function where she first met Ashby, she took one of the members of the executive aside and said, "Just watch this guy, I don't trust him." That was the first time she met him. So that was her first impression of Ashby. Well, obviously, that's changed. So that's just an interesting little aside. And I won't tell you who the person was, but it was a member of the executive and a person I know very well. Anyway, all I can say is that, I think people of Ashby's persuasion, I think, are very, very charming when it comes to dealing with women. And Ashby has always been able to tell Pauline, in my opinion, exactly what she wants to be told. Pauline would have troubles with the old executive because we would tell her things. We would say words to her occasionally like, no. But Ashby tells Pauline exactly what she wants and promises her the earth and, has all these ideas of ways to maximise electoral funding. That's an issue that's already played out on Current Affair, I think, or one of the ABC programs, and got somebody sued for telling stories. But I think he's had a huge influence over her, and I've spoken to members of the executive in the other states who were absolutely staunched, rusted on supporters of Pauline. I'm talking about the people running the executives in Western Australia, Victoria. And after Pauline got elected, Ashby went on an Australia-wide tour, flew around the country, going to every executive and sacking them and telling them basically to F off, And these were people who just were devastated. They'd spent their 20 years of their life working to get Pauline and One Nation promoted. And when finally there was a bit of success, Ashby comes around and sacks them all. And it would appear to everybody who was involved that Ashby was just a bit like Shaka Zulu said, never leave any of your enemy alive behind you, scorch the earth, kill the animals, burn the crops. It is my opinion that Ashby was getting rid of anybody who had any influence over Pauline, anybody who Pauline knew or trusted or was friends with or had anything to do with, get rid of all of them. So Pauline now has no old friends, but she's got a whole lot of new ones. And they're all friends that Ashby brought to her. I think there's a couple of young lads, Aidan and Ross, I know, and a couple of young boys straight out of university came into the office in 2017. And, I think one of them is now on the state executive. He was the guy that got charged for electoral fraud. But, they brought back, a convicted rapist to work in the office. I believe he's now...
That's crazy.
What's his name? Was it... what was his name? Got to get it. Yeah, Sean Black. Now, he did time for rape. Okay, he's paid his price to society. No problem with that. But, I did hear Malcolm Roberts say he's never met a man of higher integrity than Sean Black. The man with the most integrity he's ever met in his entire life. Well, I've travelled around the world a little bit, met a lot of people, and I wouldn't think that a convicted rapist was a person I would say is the most greatest integrity of any man I've ever met. But he's now, I think he might be national campaign director, is he? He's got quite a senior position in the party. Ashby himself, if anybody ever read the book Ashby Gate, written by Ross Jones, page 17, Ashby talks about his being caught in bed with a 15-year-old boy. Now, once upon a time, we were told that sexual relations with somebody under the age of 16 was illegal. So I just don't understand how Pauline would have a man with that kind of a background as her chief of staff. I'm not saying Ashby had sex with that 15-year-old boy, but I don't know, when you're caught by the boy's mother in bed with a young boy and he dumped him for another 15-year-old, it's just not what I would call, he's not what I would call a wholesome person, and certainly not of the type of person that the average One Nation member would want to be guiding their senator and the leader of their party.
That's horrific. I think a lot of One Nation members and supporters would actually be aghast if they heard that fact about Pauline Hanson's inner circle, that she's got these people hanging around.
Yeah, well, I mean, they'll just say, these are words from a disgruntled former member. Well, I'm not disgruntled. I mean, I'm proud of my time with One Nation. I'm proud of the fact that I was able to get Pauline elected to the Senate, and I'm proud that the party's doing well. I'm not disgruntled.
You're definitely not coming across as a bitter man. You're somebody that wants our politics to be pursued most effectively, by the sounds of things. You're not somebody that's like resentful against Hansen, but you clearly have very sensible critiques. Anyone can say, if like what has been alleged just here, that somebody sleeping with an underage boy is now running a political party which could become one of the two major parties in this country if polling is accurate. That is a really serious problem, even if it was a long time ago.
Well, I mean, I see on Sky News, and I like Sky News. I think it's the only decent news channel we have in Australia, and they're great. But I mean, they have Ashby on all the time as a guest commentator, and they've had him on there commentating on pedophiles operating out of daycares and things like that. And I thought, Sky really should do the homework. Of all the people you want to have commenting on that sort of thing, Ashby is the one they picked to talk about, pedophiles in kindergartens. I'm not saying he is a pedophile by any means, but I'm saying he sleeps with 15-year-old boys. And to me, that's a worry. And that's not the sort of person I would ask on my TV program to comment on people molesting children in kindergartens. I just think, I don't know where Sky's filter is sometimes, but anyway, there you have it. It's amazing, he just ploughs on from strength to strength. But, a lot of people have said to me that they just don't like James Ashby in the party. And it's the one thing they've got against the party is that Ashby's there running the show. Nobody elected him. Nobody voted for him. He's never been voted onto the executive, yet he's on it. I guess, Pauline might have put him there once, but that's only until the next AGM. Then you have to resign and get voted back in. So, so I'm not quite sure how he got there. Or probably half the other members of the executive for that matter. I don't know, because obviously they don't have what you'd call proper AGMs, and I don't think anybody ever gets the minutes of the AGM. And if they do, I haven't seen one. So anyway, I don't know, but I just think, the party members should demand clear, concise and legal management of the party that they support. As the Liberals should do, the Nationals, the Greens, everybody should do the same. But I'm only talking about One Nation at the moment because that's the only one I have any sort of what I guess you'd call intimate knowledge of.
To sort of pull things out a little bit with what you just said, obviously we'd love for members to demand that and for those demands to be granted. There has been some rumblings about members finally being given some rights, branches being set up, things like that. We're going into an election where there will be more scrutiny on One Nation in a couple of years' time, and perhaps they may feel the need to become more like a major party to meet those demands. That being said, do you think that that is a likely direction One Nation will trend in? Do you think it's something that is more likely to happen before or after an electoral success, or just not at all?
Well, look, Pauline was the one who abolished all branches. She said, "I'm not having people tell me what to do." So she got rid of all the branches. So let's get that straight right from the beginning. She didn't believe in branches, didn't want them, didn't want people telling her what to do or sending in policy ideas, because all policies came from her. So the fact that they are setting up branches again now is purely because the job is so big. Obviously, you have to have branches, because what do branches do? What's their main job? Raise money.
Elect candidates, raise money.
Well, you'd like to think they do. I've heard that they have in-branch meetings to elect candidates. I've been told by insiders that Ashby pretty much picks the candidate and the branch agrees with it. I may be wrong. That's what I've heard. So take that as you will. But yes, I think branches are great. You must have branches. But I say Pauline did abolish all the branches because she didn't want people telling her what to do. But obviously now she needs them. And the party does need branches, and I support that. Good on them. At last.
But do you think it's realistic that we will see members being given full rights to select candidates, or will captain's picks be a inevitable part of the party going forward? I guess the reason I ask is Pauline Hanson's getting up there in age. We don't know how much longer she'll be able to manage the party. Presumably her successor, at the moment, it looks like it could either be her daughter, Lee Hansen, or unfortunately, potentially Ashby. It would be very much preferable that members were given rights before that were the case, so then at least there would be some recourse to potentially pick a better leader of the party if they do have success. What do you think the prospects of that are, or is it just completely out of the picture?
Knowing Pauline and Ashby as I do, I would imagine it would always get down to a captain's call. If they didn't like a candidate that the branch picked, I'm pretty damn sure they'd make sure that candidate wasn't endorsed. That's just my opinion. I might be wrong, but that's my opinion.
I think all the evidence points in that direction as well, unfortunately. Moving on from that topic, I wanted to ask you about your run as an independent and what you think the future of, I suppose, principled opposition to immigration, multiculturalism, and our national sovereignty being taken away are. Obviously, independence, it's a very uphill battle. Do you think that is a good way to put pressure on, for example, One Nation, if you did have nationalist independents running in seats, or do you think that was a stopgap measure for the time being?
Well, look, I actually ran as an independent in the state election in 2020, and One Nation put me number 3 on the ticket, and then Pauline came and visited a polling booth and saw the how to vote card, went back to the office, and then they put me number 6 down behind Labor. So because it was Jim Savage, not because I was an independent. But she made that call to put me behind Labor because it was Jim Savage. So it was personality, not politics, which made that decision, which I think was wrong. I mean, I was an independent. I didn't nominate any preferences. I left it up to the voters, because an independent, you shouldn't side with anybody, in my opinion. But so when it came to Pauline back an independent, no, she will if it's the one she likes personally. But look, I think that you mentioned about the growing trend to support parties who are, standing on a platform of anti-immigration. I think it's a winner. I think the Australian public is slowly but surely getting sick of the absolute bullshit our leaders give us. Tony Burke goes down and greets all the Gazan visa recipients at the airport, 3,000 of them. I think the rest of the world gave 5 visas all up. We gave 3,000. Now, the war in Gaza is over. How many of them are going to go back? I'll tell you how many. None of them will go back. None. unless they got
They'll
enough
be
money to
too
go.
busy voting for Labor in the upcoming elections to be
Yeah,
sent back. What are you talking about, Jim?
Yeah, and sending money over there to fund Hamas, But I mean, and, the Liberals are yapping about it, but, the ISIS brides, they're not ISIS brides, they're ISIS members. Forget about the fact that they're a bride. They're even worse than if a member of Hamas and ISIS said, I want to come to Australia, I'd assume we wouldn't get a visa. These women are worse because they left Australia. They were one of us. They decided to tear up their passports, go and join these arseholes, these murderous rapists. And because their husbands and boyfriends lost the war, most of them lost their lives, and now they've got to live in the shambles that their husbands left behind, the disgraceful, dysfunctional, pathetic shit pile of Islamist way of life. Oh, I think we'll go back to Australia now. Let them. They made their nest. They can lie in it. I wouldn't take any of them back. And I think, as far as I've heard, One Nation, Pauline Hanson is the only party that said don't take them back. The Liberals are wishy-washy. Well, we have to look at them. We have to do this. They're wishy-washy. Even Angus Taylor. No, sorry, not Angus Taylor. Matt Canavan finally got the nod. He was asked a couple of days ago in Sky, does he support America and Israel in their war against Iran? He wouldn't support it. Last week he would have from the backbench. Now that he's leader, he's lost his balls. He wouldn't support it. He said, I support sending our troops there to protect Australians. That wasn't the question. The question was, do you support the war against Iran? He wouldn't say yes.
I suppose those are two different questions, though, Jim. Sorry to cut
he was
you
only
off.
asked one question. Do you support America and Israel in their war against Iran? He wouldn't support it. He said, but I do support sending our troops to protect Australians. Well, that wasn't the question. He was asked,
my point
yes
is, the question of whether we take ISIS brides into our country and whether we go and fight for foreign wars, I'd say are two different
separate issues.
Separate
issues. I was just running from one to the other. Yeah, separate issues.
What I'd say is, I don't know that that's necessarily a discrediting position to take, that we don't want Australians to die in wars that really don't affect us. The refugees will be sent into Europe, into the rest of the world. I think that's honestly, I'd side with Canavan on that, in that I think that the least amount of intervention is better.
The question wasn't whether we send troops into harm's way. That wasn't a question. The question was, does he support Israel and America's war against Iran? We don't have to get involved. I mean, America doesn't want to. I mean, what is Australia? Well, we send a couple of boomerangs and some spears. I mean, we're not going to help the Americans. We can't help them. The only way we can help them is probably the communications at Pine Gap. I'm sure that's very useful to them. But they don't want our military help. We were asked to provide a ship last year for Middle East, and the Australian government refused it. So, America knows where we stand. We're nobody. Let's not think we're better than we are. We're not. But we can at least say, yes, I support it. I mean, obviously, if you don't support it, it means that you prefer that the Iranian regime continues, murders 30-odd thousand of their own citizens. All those young girls that they assassinate, they rape them all because under Islamic belief, virgins go to heaven. So they don't want the protesters to go to heaven, so they rape them all. I mean, they rape all these young girls before they execute them. And this is the regime. Matt Canavan can't decide whether he supports attacking them. I think he's gutless, quite frankly. And I suppose Canavan.
The question would be that if you destroy the Islamic regime, if we're doing it for human rights in the Middle East, like that hasn't had a really great track record. I mean, we can look at the Taliban in Afghanistan. How long were we fighting there to change their regime? Well, I say we. I'm speaking about the West more broadly when I say sending our troops to defend over there. In my opinion, not our conflict, not in our interest at all. The US, its primary conflict is really with China, if we're thinking about it from that perspective. So is ours. We have no interest in going in there, bombing and destroying these regimes in the hopes something better will come. Who are
the two biggest suppliers of oil to China? Venezuela and Iran. Think about
Iran only supplies a very small amount of oil to China.
Oh, I thought it was more than that. Anyway, be that as it may, look, I don't think any of those Middle Eastern countries, those, they're shitholes. I mean, and they're always going to be shitholes because they're run by Muslims who are a barbaric, in my opinion, a barbaric 7th century ideology, and they will never change.
You won't find me disagreeing there at all. It's just that a question of should we be spilling our blood to fight wars for Israel in like against their enemies in the region? Not really. In my opinion, the West is better off fighting off the main issue, which is the mass immigration into our countries. And on that question, when we go back to the ISIS brides question, 100%, there should be no question that these people would even be considered being let into our country. And yet we have articles from The Guardian coming out. I don't know if you saw that a couple of weeks ago, just defending these guys. They were doing the whole, I don't know if you've ever seen this tactic used before. They'll show a sad baby, or they'll show an unfortunately dead baby washed up on a shore or something like that, and say, oh, as a result, we need to take these people into our country. Look, I don't support killing and creating these conflicts abroad, but we don't need to be bringing ISIS members into our country because they've chosen to live a horrible life over there. They were the losers in the conflict, and they have to deal with their consequences. It's just that's so ridiculous to me.
Look, on the immigration side, I agree with you. On the getting involved in foreign wars, I mean, look, I believe you can walk and chew gum at the same time, and I probably have a slightly different opinion of you. I mean, if I was 25 years old and didn't know what to do now, I'd join the army right now, and I'd volunteer to go and fight over there in a heartbeat. But that's just my personal opinion. I'm probably very conservative, and I believe that, when good men do nothing, evil prevails. And I think the Iranian regime is about as evil as they get. And we can all sit back and say it doesn't affect us. It doesn't affect us now. If they had an atomic bomb, it would certainly affect us. If they decided to completely shut down the Straits of Hormuz forever, it would affect us. So, I don't think we can live in isolation any longer. Australia is so addicted to foreign goods and foreign oil and foreign everything that we are just an observer watching our own, where we should have not 2 oil refineries, we should have 11 like we used to. We should be pumping our own oil. We should be making our own cars, our own aeroplanes, our own artillery shells, our own aircraft. But we don't, because, we just sell the stuff out of the ground and tax it and, have union labour that makes it impossible to do anything. And we have lazy governments that don't want to make hard decisions. So, we're not going to get any better until we have, and that's where, again, Pauline Hanson comes in. I think, Pauline's not the most articulate person in the world, but I think her moral compass is in the right direction as far as her political views are concerned. And I think we need a change in this country. And I don't think, Pauline would never be a prime minister. But, if One Nation had a significant influence or a balance of power, then we could possibly see some real positive changes in this country. And I hope we do.
Yeah, fingers crossed. What do you think realistically the polling numbers will translate into at the upcoming election? Obviously, you've had a very extensive, you've got many years spent fighting in politics. How often do you see these polling and this hype actually translate into electoral success?
Well, look, you're asking. Don't ask me, mate. If I was an expert in that, I wouldn't have run for so many elections.
Sorry, very speculative. It's a very speculative question. But I suppose I just think, how realistic do you think this momentum is going to translate into? We've seen some numbers as much as 20 lower house seats at the next federal. Do you think those are accurate, or do you think that by the time we come around to that next election, people have moved on once again?
Well, who knows? It's a fair way out yet. People may have moved on. If the coalition get their act together, they'll claw some votes back. I think One Nation's big chance is always going to be in the Senate, because you need 14% to get a seat there. In the House of Reps, you need 50% plus 1. And that means you're going to have strong preference deals with other like-minded conservatives. And history has shown that the Conservatives have not backed each other. They fought each other. And from personal experience, when I ran for the Senate, I had a deal with the National Party when I ran for the Senate in Queensland. And the deal was with Barnaby Joyce. And we agreed to he asked us to back their candidate. I think it was Brett Mason. He was a candidate for the Senate in Queensland. And I think it was 2010. And Barnaby said, look, will you give your first preference to the Nationals? We need to get Nason elected. And I said to him, Barnaby came out to our office at Beenleigh, and I had the whole executive there. It was on a Sunday. And I said, Jesus, Barnaby, you want us to give you your number one? I said, our preferences got you elected when you ran out at St George in the House of Reps years ago, when you remember for Queensland. We got you elected there, but you didn't give us your preferences in return. But I said, we voted for you in the early days because you ran on a platform of opposing the sale of Telstra. Then when he got elected, he voted to sell it. So, there you go. But so I said to him when he came to us and said, will you support our candidate, Reconnecting, in the Senate? Give us your first preference. And I said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. We'll give him our first preference, and in return, you preference me, Jim Savage from One Nation, ahead of Labor. There was 89 candidates running in that Senate ticket. I said, I don't care if I'm 88th, as long as Labor is 89th. I said, I don't care who else you put where, but you put me ahead of Labor, because that's the only thing that mattered. So we shook hands. Done deal. Well, we gave the Nationals our number one preference, and that was enough to get the National Senator elected. Barnaby put me 89th, dead last. Now, I shook his hand and looked him in the eye. I even made him a cup of coffee. And so I don't believe anything politicians say, and I agree with everything Barnaby's saying about the situation in Australia, immigration, especially the climate policy of net zero. 100% agree with him, 100%. I wish him all the best. Hope he does really, really well. Trust him on a preference still? No way in the world. They all lie when it comes to preferences. They have done when it comes to doing deals with One Nation. It's different now because One Nation is in a far stronger position. They're far more fearful of One Nation, and they may be a bit more honest in their dealings. But in the past, they've all been absolutely terrible to One Nation. Always put us last, and even when we did deals, they broke the deals and put us last. So, if you're a politician and your mouth's moving, you're probably lying.
I suppose that brings me into what will make this the final question, just to wrap up. One Nation is starting to bring in people from other parties, particularly, obviously, Liberals, Nationals, people like Cory Bernardi, people like Barnaby, like you just said. What do you think this is going to, what impact do you think this is going to have on One Nation's principled stand on immigration, on various other policies? Do you think that'll become more mediated? We already have seen Barnaby wavering when Hansen made that comment about no good Muslims. Do you think that they're going to be counterproductive in our push towards opposing mass immigration and multiculturalism, or do you think it is necessary to bring these big names over in order to help facilitate an electoral success at the next election?
The latter. Obviously, getting Barnaby was a great stroke of good fortune. Cory Bernardi, I've always liked Cory Bernardi. I think they do need the big names. You need people who people recognise and have a certain amount of respect, and also they have some experience. They're not as likely to. The trouble with the party like One Nation in the past, we've had various candidates, and I've interviewed many candidates over the years and endorsed them, and then they'll go out there and the TV stations or the TV cameras get them, shove a mic in their face and ask them a whole lot of questions, and they always got a gotcha question, and they get them, and then that's all the news that night. We had a young girl called Stephanie Bannister many years ago that made a comment about Muslims and they just about destroyed her. People were crashing into their cars, death threats. It was terrible. And it was just because the media, Channel 7 set them up. That female reporter, I forget her name, horrible girl. But anyway, so look, these experienced operators like Cory Bernardi aren't going to make foolish mistakes. Barnaby trying to water down Pauline's comments about good Muslims. That's just him trying to be a retail politician. I'm sure in private he'd agree with 100%. But he's trying to take the edge off it a bit, make it a little bit less sharp. I can understand that. But, no comment Barnaby's made about immigrations has made headlines for the next week in a low, but Pauline's has. So who scored the most points? Who kicked the most goals there? It was Pauline at the end of the day. And, those who don't think we have a problem with immigration and think that Islam's wonderful and that Muhammad just went around kissing babies, not cutting their throats and raping them, they're never going to vote for One Nation. They're probably never going to vote for the Liberals or the Nationals. And I think our leaders need to understand there are a certain core of the population that are going to vote Labor and Greens no matter what because they're stupid. Being smart's doesn't give you immunity from stupidity. There are plenty of smart people out there who are really, really stupid. and they will vote Labor and Greens no matter what. And you know what? The Conservatives shouldn't go around changing their policies or toning it down to appease them, because they're never going to vote for them anyway, but they're going to risk losing Conservative voters. So, Pauline's concerned, go for it, Pauline. Good luck to you. More power to you.
All right. Thank you for coming on this week, Jim. I appreciate you providing us with your insight. I think that it's given people a much deeper look into One Nation rather than the surface level treatment it often receives from media and pundits alike. So really appreciate that. Are there any, do you publish on any other platforms? Are there any forms of content you'd like to point the audience to checking out?
No, I tell you what, since I've come back from overseas about 12 months ago, I've tried to make politics very, very low on my priorities. And, probably Sky. Look, I would tell anybody if they to watch Sky. I think Sky is probably the only media outlet, TV media outlet in Australia that tells the truth and gives an honest appraisal of what's going on. And they'll interview the bad guys as well as the good guys. They're not like the mainstream media who only interview the people they like. I think I would challenge anybody who wants to know what's going on, watch Sky. Even though they said nasty things about me, but that's just personal. But watch Sky.
Okay. That's definitely a bit of a generational divide. Yeah, I agree with this podcast. Definitely a little bit of a generational divide there, Jim. A lot of younger guys on the scene, not so into Sky these days.
I don't watch podcasts. I don't even know whether I know how to find one on my computer, honestly. I don't even know how to use this computer I'm talking now, and I've had it for a week, and I can turn it on. That's about it. But I'm not going to turn it off. So, technology.
Yeah, it was quite the battle to get you on the podcast, but I'm really glad that we made it happen. So thank you, mate, for coming on and, doing all the hard work we had to do to get this podcast working. And I appreciate it. Have a great rest of your week.
Well, I had to spend $1,000 on a new computer just to be on your podcast.
Mate, I appreciate the contribution. Hopefully this pays you back in joy and exposure. Hopefully.
All right. All the best. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, mate.
Cheers.